To talk more, not only about Boris Johnson's speech later on today, but also the attack in Streatham yesterday and the changes the government is planning to the way the justice system deals with a convicted terrorist, joined by Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Rishi Sunak. Hello, Chief. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Appreciate it. This guy was released early, and the level of surveillance that he had suggested that he was a risk.
So the Metropolitan Police have made a statement about the fact that he was being surveilled. I can't add anything more to that because it's an ongoing investigation. But you're absolutely right. This is an issue that in the wake of the awful terrorist attack also at the end of last year, the Prime Minister said immediately that we would take steps to focus on this. And just 2 weeks ago, the Home Secretary outveiled a package of measures to tackle counter-terrorism. These included tougher sentencing, ending automatic early release, and an overhaul of the licensing regime, which is the point at which convicted terrorists are released. And those are all things that will come forward as part of a new counter-terrorism bill.
Yeah, OK, but you knew this guy was a wrong-un, all of that in place, and you still let him out?
Well, the legislation is in place and it requires new legislation to change those rules. Then that's something that we said, which is why it's a priority to bring this new counter-terrorism bill forward within the first 100 days of the government. That's something that the Prime Minister committed to. That's something that the Home Secretary and Justice Secretary reiterated a couple of weeks ago when they made those measures or they made the announcement about those measures, and you will see that happen. So and of course, later today, the Prime Minister will also be making a further statement.
Indeed, but you won't look at other releases that are coming up. I mean, how many more people have to be attacked on our streets before this new legislation is put in place?
No, that's not right. In the wake of what happened in November, actually, the Justice Secretary, I think he might well have been on your show at the time, actually said that we did a wholesale review of every single prisoner that had been released recently and was due to be released. That work was already done and has been done. But in terms of changing when people are released, that does require an act of Parliament, requires a new law. And as we said, we've committed to being one of the first acts that we will bring forward within 100 days will be exactly that. And it's something that, as I said, the Prime Minister committed to doing back in November.
OK, but my point remains then, how many more of these attacks are acceptable before the implementation of the new law comes into place?
Of course, no attacks are acceptable, which is why we're acting as quickly as we can to put in place a new set of measures. And it's not just about early release, it's about tougher sentencing in the first place, it's about the provisions around automatic early release, which we've seen have been problematic, and then it's about investing in our licensing regime. We're doubling the number of counter-terrorism probation officers of the people who deal with counter-terrorist offenders at the point they're released, so we're overhauling that entire regime, doubling the number of officers, and all of that comes as well with a huge increase in funding for counter-terrorism. But these are steps that are being taken, at quite rapid pace. The government's only been formed for a few weeks. This will be one of the first pieces of legislation that is brought forward within the first 100 days.
I completely understand that. So, but that Boris Johnson was on TV when the attack happened at Fishmongers Hall saying, we are going to lock these people up and throw away the key. Less than 2 months later, similar circumstances, and it was only by luck that people are not dead today.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily luck, as I would say, obviously the police.
This guy was life-threatening condition.
There's an ongoing investigation, and the Met Police, I know, are doing absolutely everything that they can and will to keep everybody safe. But the Prime Minister, when he said that, we were in the middle of an election campaign. Obviously, the government was formed at the end of December, and we said within the first 100 days, new legislation will be brought forward. Those plans have been developed. 2 weeks ago, the Home Secretary and Justice Secretary outveiled that package of measures, a pretty comprehensive package of measures to tackle all the areas that I just outlined. And it is a priority, and it will be a priority.
Yeah, but just to finish on this point, the fact remains that other people could still be released to carry out more attacks, like the 2 that we've seen in the last 2 months, until this is implemented.
Well, until the law is changed, obviously we have to work with the laws that we have around when people are released. But what we can do, is invest in our counter-terrorism policing, which we are doing. The counter-terrorism policing budget is up 30 or 40% over the last few years. It's going up 10% next year. We're doubling the number of counter-terrorism probation officers. All of those things, together with the ongoing work that the Met and other police officers do, is very vital in keeping us all safe and making sure that these kind of people are kept kept under surveillance, that our security
He
and
was under
safety
surveillance.
is protected.
He was under surveillance, and he still managed to get hold of a knife and stab
I said
people
it's
on
an
a high street
ongoing
in
investigation.
London.
Kay, you'll appreciate I'm not able to
Well,
comment.
he's dead on the street in Streatham. I mean, you know, to a certain extent, we know what happened. The Home Secretary promising further fundamental changes. What are they?
Well, the package that we outlined 2 weeks ago was tougher sentencing in the first instance, and that's something the Prime Minister talked about in November as well, reviewing and ending this system of automatic early release, which has also been problematic, an overhaul of the licensing regime, and that's the part where people are released, what happens to them, why are they released, what are they doing, how carefully are they tracked. So an overhaul of all that system, including a doubling of counter-terrorism probationary officers and new hostel accommodation at that point as well. And all of that is going to form part of the counter-terrorism bill, which I talked about. But the Prime Minister has said that he'll be making an announcement later today about going further than that.
Is no deal still on the table as far as the European Union is concerned?
No, I mean, we have a deal and we have now left the EU, so that is now just off the table. What we are talking about now, and what the Prime Minister's speech today will be about, is about our future relationship. We've been very clear we want to participate in a trade negotiation with the EU on the basis of sovereign equals, a friendly spirit of cooperation and goodwill. We'll be seeking a trade relationship, and that's one that we hope they will enter into that spirit of goodwill as well. But it's not one where we will sit here and be told that we have to follow each and every individual EU rule. That's not something that's common in trade negotiations, and we don't expect it to be the case here.
But there are certain rights and obligations, aren't there, with any sort of trade deal? If you want those rights in trade relations with the EU, you have to sign up to certain obligations. That's how deals work.
No, you're absolutely right. And the EU have been very clear in the past that what is on offer is they used to say that you can have a Norway-style arrangement where you are part of the single market and you follow all their rules, or you can have a Canada-style free trade agreement. And we've been very clear consistently that that's the kind of agreement that we're seeking, a Canada-style free trade agreement. The Canada deal removed 98% of all tariffs between the EU and Canada. And of course, you're right, in there are provisions around how each side will behave so that there's free and fair competition. And we would absolutely honour those. That's very different to saying that you will automatically follow each and every single EU rule. That's not what's in the Canada deal, and we don't see why that should apply here.
Is it reasonable to compare any EU deal with a Canada-style deal or an Australia-style deal that we've just heard about as well? What exactly is an Australia-style deal?
Well, Australia's style deal is one where there are specific agreements for various sectors and other arrangements that two bilateral countries might wish to make without having a full, deep, comprehensive free trade association arrangement. But we're very much hoping that we can get the Canada deal. That's something that the EU's chief negotiator consistently has said in the past was available. That's the basis on which we signed the political declaration. It talks about that deep and comprehensive free trade negotiation in there. And again, we enter these talks in the spirit of cooperation and goodwill, a determination to get what's best for Britain, but we wouldn't be signing up locked up and all EU rules. That's not something that free trade agreements typically do. We wouldn't expect the EU to follow each and every one of our rules as part of that, so they shouldn't expect the same the other way.
Indeed, but we're not in Canada. We have far deeper trade relations with the European Union. Our economies are far more intertwined, and we obviously we're geographically much closer.
Yes, but what matters is the degree of access and the tariff liberalisation you get, and the model that the EU themselves have offered. This is Michel Barnier himself.
But we need to do a trade deal with the
He has
European
been very
Union, don't
clear.
we? I mean, our trade is what, 40%? We trade with the EU?
The EU themselves have offered a Canada-style deal. They have been very clear multiple times that that is something that we could have, or they said you could have a Norway-style deal, which is remaining part of the single market and all the rules and things that we'd have to follow. We didn't want that. We had a vote in this country to regain our independence, and we said we'll have a Canada deal, and that's what the EU offered, and we're going to take them up on that offer.
OK, even if it takes us past the end of the year?
Yeah, as we saw before, we've been very clear. We don't want more dither and delay in these processes. We think having a deadline is good. It focuses minds and concentrates everybody. And indeed, the political declaration that we've signed with the EU commits both sides to concluding those negotiations
with the option of an extension.
over the course of this year. Yes, but it commits them to actually working to get it concluded this year, and that's our intention, and Prime Minister's been very clear. No more extensions, no more delay.
When you say intention, what if it took us a little bit past the end of the year? Because we're hoping to do a trade deal with the United States at the same time.
Yeah, and we've staffed up our Department for International Trade so they're able to conduct multiple negotiations at once, and we've been very clear that it's not just the US, but Australia, Japan, Canada, New Zealand. These other countries as well will also be
our two biggest trading blocs would be the US and the EU, and both will want to know what we're agreeing with the other side before they sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, which is actually why it's good to be able to do them in parallel so we can make those decisions in the round, and that's something that we've been very clear about. The Secretary of State for the US was here last week, very positive about our ability to conclude that trade negotiation over the course of this year. Other countries have been very warm and positive about that as well. So we enter into this new chapter in our nation's history with a spirit of optimism and confidence, actually. And this is about our future as a trading nation. The Prime Minister will be talking about this today in his speech. It's a new beginning for us. The EU trading relationship is one part of it. But there are lots of other countries as well that are keen to do business with us. We're keen to do business with them as well. And this is going to be a good year for the UK.
But we shouldn't underestimate that the European Union is 40% of our trading. And we go into those negotiations with people like Michael Gove saying, you can keep your mitts off our fishing because that is not up for discussion. If we start removing things from the table, even before we start those discussions, it's not going to be very fruitful discussions, are they?
Well, look, I think all discussions and negotiations are always tough, but I think it's important that the EU understands what's happened.
And everyone has to be happy for it to be a good deal.
Needs to understand what's happened here. We've just had an election with a pretty decisive result where we've set out a very clear desire about our view of a future relationship with the EU. It's one that is based on friendly cooperation, but it's one where we're sovereign equals. And that is something I hope that they recognise. It's something we're very clear about in the election. I think that's what people want. They've confirmed that twice now in votes, that they vote for our independence. We don't want to be a rule follower. We want to have control of our borders and immigration system, our courts, our regulation. All of this are things that we'll be able to do now that we have left the EU.
Yeah. That's a lot to do, though, between now and December. Why are you, as a government, so determined that we will leave on the 31st of December, even if the discussions and the deal has not been done?
Well, I'd say we already have left. So we've now left the EU. We're in a transition period, which will end at the end of the year, because it's important that we have a clear deadline, that people are focused on that deadline and working towards it.
We've heard about deadlines before, though, of course, haven't we? The Prime Minister promised to die in a ditch previously.
What we don't want is a repeat of the last few years where we got stuck in this quagmire just debating all of these things for year after year. That's absolutely not what we want, actually. We want clarity of focus and purpose. That's what we have with a clear deadline, and we'll be working hard to do that. And I hope the Europeans uphold what they've said in the political declaration and work with their best efforts to do that as well.
OK, 31st of December is when that deadline is. If we have not done a deal by then, we will leave.
We have already left.
I know you keep saying we've left already, but we have not. OK.
We have left. We are now no longer a member of the EU.
But we need to do a trade deal with the European Union.
No, we don't need to. We have left. We can.
40% of our trade is with the European Union.
There are lots of different ways that countries trade with each other. We trade with lots of countries around the world. The EU trades with lots of countries around the world. They trade with some countries as part of the customs union. They trade with other countries like Canada through a free trade agreement, and they trade with countries like Australia with specific little agreements here and there for sectors. So there are a range of options we can pursue. So either we will get a free trade agreement that we said that we would like, and that's what they've offered in the past. So I'm hopeful that they make good on that. Or else we will trade on the basis of the terms that are already negotiated, like Australia and like many other countries. But either way,
sounds as though we've got the whip hand. Is that what you're saying?
Either way, I think people should feel very confident about our future. The Prime Minister will be talking about that today. As you've seen, we're seeing lots of economic forecasters upgrading consumer confidence, manufacturing services, because people see that this is now behind us. They're looking forward to the future. Trade is important, of course it is, but it's only one part of what's going to drive our economy forward. All the other things we're doing to invest in infrastructure R&D, education, to unite and level up across the country. All those things are going to make a tangible difference to people's quality of life over the coming years as well.
OK, so you're saying it's not that important for us to do a trade deal with our closest partners?
That's not what I said. I've said we would like to do one. That's one that they've offered in the past, and we very much hope that they continue that spirit. That's what we are seeking to, and that's what the Prime Minister will outline today. We want to have a free trade agreement, and that's something, as I said, they've offered. We're ready to do the deal on that basis. But that doesn't mean we should have to follow all their rules. That's not what free trade agreements typically involve. It shouldn't be the case here.
You're a rising star, aren't you? I mean, you're out defending the government on all sorts of levels today. What do you expect to happen to you in the reshuffle?
Well, that's very kind of you to say, but I'm part of a team where lots of people are all out talking about what the government's agenda is. Prime Minister said that he's going to look at some changes to government and how government works, and we'll all learn about those at the same time, and I'll probably learn about it at the same time you do. But I feel very fortunate to be a part of this team. I think we're doing a lot of exciting things. If you look at what we're doing in the Treasury, we're trying to help deliver on the Prime Minister's ambition to, as I said, unite and level up across the country. The Chancellor is someone who's talked for a long time about investing in infrastructure. We're going to be unveiling an infrastructure revolution, an extra £100 billion invested in road and rail and buses, in R&D. Those are all exciting things to be a part of, so I hope I get to carry on doing that.